The last echo of footsteps had already faded. The office, a tower of glass and silence above Manhattan, was finally asleep. Only the faint hum of the city below seeped through the windows like a memory that refused to die. Leah Johnson stacked coffee cups into a bin, her movements small and careful. The way people move when they've learned not to take up too much space. The long table still bore traces of power, half-eaten croissants, folded papers, marked with the names of men who made decisions worth millions. She was invisible here, the temporary assistant, the woman everyone forgot, by the time the elevator doors closed. And yet tonight, something inside her was restless. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A notification from her landlord, rent due. Another reminder she couldn't breathe too loud in the world without paying for it. She sighed, placed the phone face down, and plugged it into the Bluetooth speaker. The screen lit up with a playlist she hadn't touched in years, Grandma's Kitchen. Her thumb hovered over the song title, Fly Me to the Moon. She hesitated. That melody was a door she'd closed long ago. But silence was heavier than memory, and she was tired of carrying it. So, she pressed play. The first soft notes spilled into the room like light through cracked blinds. Leah exhaled. The blazer came off. The shoes, too. She stood barefoot on the polished floor, a black woman in a tower built by white men, claiming 3 minutes of space that belonged to no one but her. And then, she moved. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but honestly. Her arms lifted like she was reaching for a version of herself she'd left behind, the girl who used to dance with her grandmother in a tiny kitchen flower dusting the air like snow. She laughed under her breath. God, I've missed this. Outside the glass wall, someone stopped walking. Grayson Sterling hadn't meant to be there. He'd forgotten a file, that was all. A simple return to the 42nd floor before heading home to an empty penthouse and a bottle of 20-year-old scotch he wouldn't finish. He was the kind of man the world noticed handsome in the way statues are handsome, cold, expensive, untouchable. The youngest CEO in the company's history, built from privilege and precision. To most people, he was success personified. To himself, he was a well-tailored absence. But when he stepped out of the elevator and heard the faint hum of jazz echoing down the corridor, he didn't move. He followed it like a sound that knew his name before he did. Through the glass wall, he saw her. Leah, the temp assistant. He'd seen her 100 times in passing, carrying coffee, typing quietly, always avoiding his gaze. A face on the edge of vision. But now, she wasn't small at all. She was alive. Her body caught the light, with every turn soft, unplanned, free. The kind of freedom he hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. Something cracked open in him. It wasn't desire, not yet. It was recognition, the painful kind, like seeing a reflection of what you've lost. Leah spun once, laughing, and then she saw him. The music didn't stop, her world did. She froze mid-breath, eyes wide, the color draining from her face. The hum of the city seemed to disappear, replaced by the thudding of her own heart. "Oh my God," she whispered, reaching for the speaker. The chair leg caught her ankle. The tray of cups rattled. She stumbled. Silence slammed down like a door. I didn't know anyone was here," she stammered. "I was just cleaning. I'm sorry. It won't happen again." Grayson didn't answer right away. His face was unreadable, a sculpture caught between shock and something he couldn't name. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "You danced." Her throat tightened. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry, I don't," he said quickly. "Don't apologize." She blinked, confused. This was not the man people whispered about, the ruthless, immaculate Sterling, who fired people for being 5 minutes late. He stepped inside the room. The air shifted. His presence filled it, quiet, but immense. "What was that song?" he asked. She hesitated. "Fly Me to the Moon. My grandmother used to sing it when she cooked." He nodded slowly, gaze unfocused, as if he was looking at something miles away. She had good taste. Leia smiled, small and uncertain. "Yeah, she did." He walked past her, retrieving the forgotten file. But just as he reached the door, he paused. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he said, not turning around. "Before I forgot how to feel things." Her breath caught. She didn't know what to say, or if she should say anything at all. Then he looked back, eyes catching hers. "Next time you dance," he said quietly, "don't stop." The door closed behind him. Leia stood still, the weight of her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The city returned, muffled and distant. She sat on the edge of the table, the words looping in her mind. Don't stop. But what did that even mean? Was it kindness? Curiosity? Or something she shouldn't even let herself imagine? She looked at her reflection in the dark glass, the woman who always blended into the background, who smiled politely and left no trace. But tonight, someone had seen her. Really seen her. The thought terrified her more than it thrilled her. Because being invisible was safe. Being seen meant you could be hurt. Her phone buzzed again. A text from her best friend. "Kenya still at work, girl. You're gonna burn out." She typed back. Just finishing up, then deleted it before sending. What could she even say? That her billionaire boss had caught her dancing, barefoot under the moonlight. That he'd told her not to stop, like he meant something by it. The clock on the wall read 10:03. She gathered her things, shut off the lights, and stepped into the hallway. The floor was dark except for the faint glow from the elevator at the end. As she waited, her reflection shimmered in the glass doors. Two versions of herself staring back, the quiet assistant and the woman who dared to move. She didn't know which one would wake up tomorrow. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. She stepped in, the scent of his cologne still lingering faintly in the air. The lights glowed pale gold around her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small, just uncertain. When the doors closed, she whispered to no one in particular, "Don't stop, huh?" Below her, the city stretched out a galaxy of lives, moving too fast to notice anyone like her. But somewhere up in the penthouse, she imagined him, Grayson Sterling, replaying the same moment in his mind, wondering why a stranger's laughter had made him forget his loneliness for a heartbeat. Outside, the moon hung low over the skyline, pale and patient. It had watched 1,000 stories like theirs. Men who built empires. Women who cleaned up after them, all searching for something real in a world made of glass. And maybe, just maybe, tonight was the beginning of one more story like that. When Leia reached the street, the air was cold, the kind that bit softly at the edges of your thoughts. She walked toward the bus stop, her heels clicking against the pavement like an old rhythm finding its way back. Above her, the tower lights flickered. Behind one of those windows, a man stood motionless, looking down at her disappearing figure, and for reasons he couldn't explain, his chest ached with something that felt dangerously close to hope. He lifted the file he'd come back for unread and set it aside. The city looked different tonight, less like an empire, more like a stage waiting for something unexpected to begin. Grayson exhaled, the ghost of a smile forming at the corner of his mouth. Next time, he murmured to the empty room, maybe I won't stop either. And as the city settled back into its sleepless rhythm. Two forgotten souls, one walking home, one trapped at the top, carried the same quiet fire neither of them yet understood. A melody lingered in both their heads, soft and persistent. Fly me to the moon. Let me play among the stars. Neither knew it yet, but this song this night had already rewritten the orbit of their lives. For 3 days, Leah tried to pretend nothing had changed. She kept her head down, filed reports, fetched coffee, answered emails. But beneath the surface of her calm routine, the memory of that night in the empty office kept replaying his voice, quiet and deliberate. Don't stop. She told herself it meant nothing. Maybe it was pity, maybe curiosity. Either way, men like Grayson Sterling didn't see women like her, not beyond the edges of their spreadsheets and schedules. So when a message appeared on her screen at 4:47 p.m., Mr. Sterling requests your presence in his office. Her stomach twisted. She walked to the elevator with a sense of dread, so sharp it almost made her dizzy. The 42nd floor was silent, carpeted in wealth. When she knocked, his voice called out, "Come in." He was at his desk jacket, off sleeves, rolled up eyes, unreadable. The same man who'd caught her dancing barefoot now looked as though nothing could surprise him. "Sit down," he said. She did carefully. Grayson folded his hands. "I'll get to the point." Here it comes, she thought. The reprimand, the dismissal. But instead he asked quietly, "Do you like dinner?" She blinked. "Dinner?" "Yes," he said, almost amused by her confusion. "The kind that happens after work, usually with food." She stared at him. "Are you asking me out?" "I'm asking you to eat," he said, leaning back. "With me." Her pulse stuttered. "Why?" He hesitated, not for effect, but as if the truth was fragile. "Because I can't stop thinking about that song, about you dancing, about honesty. I'd like to understand it." Leah searched his face for mockery, but found only weariness and curiosity, the kind that wasn't about ownership, but recognition. So she said yes. The next evening, the city was rinsed in gold, the Hudson reflecting streaks of fading sun. Leah stood in front of her mirror, debating which version of herself to bring. The professional, the invisible, the girl who used to dream. In the end, she chose a dark green dress that had belonged to her grandmother Cotton, modest, but soft enough to breathe in. When she opened her door, he was already there. No chauffeur, no tinted car. Just Grayson in a navy coat and a quiet smile that looked almost uncertain. "You look..." He paused as if searching for the right word. "Real." She laughed under her breath. "That's one way to say it." He smiled. "I meant beautiful." They drove through the city in companionable silence. The streets outside flickered past neon and shadow laughter and sirens. He took her to a small restaurant by the river, half hidden behind a row of ivy-covered walls. Inside, the light was low, the air thick with the scent of bread and candle wax. It didn't feel like the world she knew him from, not marble and glass, but warmth and quiet. "This is my favorite place," he said, as the hostess led them to a corner booth. "No one ever looks for me here." She smiled. "I can see why." For a while they talked like strangers who forgot they were supposed to be cautious. She told him about her grandmother, the woman who had raised her in a small apartment in New Orleans. How the smell of gumbo and Ella Fitzgerald's voice had filled their nights. She used to say, Leah murmured, tracing the rim of her glass, "When the world gets too loud, you dance until you remember who you are." Grayson listened, not as a man used to being obeyed, but as someone who'd forgotten how to listen at all. He told her about his brother Michael, the golden child, who died at 22 from a heart attack no one saw coming. "He wanted to be an artist," Grayson said. "But my father decided art didn't belong to people like us, so he gave it up." For the company. For me. And you took his place. Grayson nodded, and I never stopped paying for it. There was no pity in her gaze, only understanding. Two lives from opposite worlds, both shaped by sacrifice, hers by necessity, his by expectation. Between courses, the air softened. His laughter came easier, and hers followed. The candlelight flickered against his face, and for the first time, she saw the man behind the empire, not the CEO everyone feared, but a man who had built walls so high, he'd forgotten the sky existed. "You surprise me," she said softly. He looked up. "How so? You're not who they say you are." He smiled faintly. "Neither are you." The words hung between them, intimate and dangerous. Outside, the river whispered against the docks. A boat horn sounded in the distance, low and mournful. When the check came, he didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, he looked at her with a strange, quiet gravity. "Leia, I don't know what this is, but I don't want to get it wrong." She tilted her head. "Then what do you want?" He exhaled. To take it slow. To see where it goes honestly, without pretending it's something else. Something in his tone made her chest ache. No promises, no declarations, just truth. She nodded. "Slow sounds good." They left the restaurant just as the first chill of night crept in. The city hummed around them, headlights streaking like veins of light across the bridge. He walked her to her building, hands in his coat pockets. Silence, stretching comfortably between them. At the door, she turned to him. "Thank you. For dinner." He smiled. "Thank you for saying yes." For a moment, it felt like gravity shifted, as if the world held its breath, waiting to see what they'd do next. He didn't kiss her. She didn't step closer. But in that suspended heartbeat, something deeper passed between them. Not lust, not power, but recognition. Two people who'd spent years unseen, finally finding a reflection. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet enough that only the wind could have carried it. "You make the city feel different." She smiled, a little unsteady. "That's a dangerous thing to say to a woman you barely know." "I know," he said, and turned to leave. She watched him walk down the street until he disappeared into the glow of the traffic lights. And for the first time in a long time, the loneliness didn't feel endless. It felt waiting. Upstairs in her small apartment, she replayed every glance, every word. There had been no touch, no kiss, just a current between them that felt more real than anything she'd known. She stood by the window looking out at the same skyline he probably saw from his penthouse across the river. For a fleeting second, she imagined their two worlds overlapping, his of glass and control, hers of struggle and grace. And she wondered, not with fear, but with quiet awe. What if this could be something true? Across the river in his own apartment, Grayson poured himself a drink and didn't touch it. The city lights glittered on the surface of the glass like tiny stars. But all he saw was her, the green of her dress, the warmth in her voice when she said, "Slow sounds good." He'd spent years surrounded by people who wanted his time, his money, his name, but never his truth. And then came Leia, barefoot, in a silent office, reminding him that there was still music left in him if he dared to listen. He set the glass down untouched. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the urge to run from himself. Instead, he picked up his phone and typed a message he never sent. "Next time, I'll bring the music." He deleted it, smiled faintly, and looked out at the river again. Somewhere out there, she was looking too. He could feel it, the strange magnetic pull of being seen. Neither of them knew it yet, but this fragile thread between them was already beginning to stretch across Whisper's rules and the sharp edges of a world that did not forgive softness. And as the night deepened over Manhattan, the city seemed to pulse with a quiet question neither of them could yet answer. What happens when the man who has everything falls? For the woman, the world refuses to see. Outside, a soft wind carried the echo of distant jazz, a promise disguised as melody. Tomorrow, the world would start to notice. The following Monday began like any other emails, elevators, the familiar rhythm of shoes clicking across marble floors. But beneath that rhythm, something restless stirred. It started as a whisper in the break room, a passing comment, a rumor that slid through the corridors like perfume and poison at once. By noon, everyone had heard it. The temp, the one from HR. She had dinner with him. No one said his name outright, but they didn't have to. In an empire like Sterling Global, there was only one him. When Leia walked into the office that morning, the air had changed. Conversations paused when she passed. Eyes lingered too long. A woman at the copier pretended to fix a paper jam, just to watch her. She pretended not to notice. She kept typing, printing, smiling at no one. But every click of her keyboard felt like a heartbeat out of sync. By early afternoon, she received an email from Human Resources subject meeting request. Immediate attendance required. Her palms went cold. She reread it twice, as if the words might rearrange into something harmless. They didn't. The HR office was a glass box with no warmth, just neutral walls and a view of the city that made everyone inside feel small. A woman in a gray suit sat across from her, expression unreadable. She had the kind of smile people wear when they're about to take something away. Ms. Johnson. She began adjusting her glasses. We've received information suggesting that you've engaged in personal contact with Mr. Sterling outside of working hours. Is that correct? Leia's mouth went dry. We had dinner. Dinner, the woman repeated, writing something down. Would you consider this a personal relationship? Leia hesitated. Every word felt like a trap. It was dinner. The woman looked up. Ms. Johnson, you understand that company policy prohibits relationships, personal, romantic, or otherwise, between employees and executive leadership. Even perceived relationships can compromise internal trust. Leia's throat tightened. It wasn't like that. The woman smiled politely. Intentions rarely matter once perception takes hold. That was the thing about rumors. They didn't need truth to destroy you. The meeting lasted less than 15 minutes. When Leia left, her body felt hollow, her hands trembling around the clipboard. She hadn't realized she was still holding. By 3 o'clock, she received the email she'd been dreading. Subject: termination of temporary contract. Effective immediately. Her ID badge would stop working by end of day. Security would escort her out. Just like that, a single dinner had cost her everything. She sat at her desk in silence, the fluorescent light flickering overhead. Around her, the office carried on, phones ringing, printers humming, colleagues laughing as if nothing had happened. She began packing her things. The small photo of her grandmother, a chipped coffee mug, a few pens she'd bought with her own money, because the company ones always vanished. Her fingers shook as she slid the box closed, and then she heard the door behind her open. Leia. His voice low, steady, too familiar. She turned. Grayson stood there, still in his suit, his tie loosened, his eyes storm dark. I just found out, he said. She shook her head. It's done, Grayson. They've already sent the email. He stepped closer. No, this isn't done. You didn't do anything wrong. Try telling them that. I will. His jaw tightened. I'll fix it. Don't, she said, voice small but firm. If you fight this, they'll make it worse. For you, for me. He exhaled sharply, pacing. They think they can threaten me. They're wrong. Grayson. He stopped. You think I'm going to let them treat you like you don't matter? Like what we had was… She cut him off. What did we have? The question hung between them, raw and trembling. His expression softened. Something real. You know that. She looked away. Maybe that's exactly the problem. Silence, heavy and fragile. Then from the far end of the corridor, a voice broke through. Mr. Sterling, the board is waiting for you. He didn't move. The voice came again, sharper this time. Sir, it's urgent. Grayson turned back to Leia, eyes searching hers. Wait for me, he said quietly. Please. She opened her mouth to answer, but the elevator doors closed behind him before she could speak. The sound echoed through the empty floor, leaving only her and the hum of fluorescent light. She sank into her chair, the cardboard box of her belongings beside her, staring at the place where he'd just stood. Wait for me, he'd said. But wait for what? For a man who lived in a world that would never let her belong. For a promise too fragile to survive the weight of his name. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I saw the photo of you two at dinner. Be careful who you trust. Her heart stuttered. Photo. What photo? She opened the message. No attachment, just those words. Outside the window, clouds rolled in over the skyline. The city darkened, the lights coming on like stars behind glass. Leia picked up her box and walked toward the elevator, each step echoing against the marble floor. When the doors opened, she caught her reflection, small, tired, but still standing. She whispered to it, "Don't stop." The words that once gave her courage now tasted like irony. Downstairs, the lobby was almost empty. Security gave her a sympathetic nod as she handed over her badge. She smiled politely, the way women do when they refuse to break in public. Outside, the rain had started on misty, relentless. She stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, the city's pulse thrumming around her. Somewhere high above in that glass tower, Grayson was facing a boardroom full of men deciding what she was worth. Maybe nothing. Maybe too much. The bus hissed to a stop in front of her. She climbed aboard, pressed her forehead against the window, and watched the tower recede into the distance. Inside that building, she had been invisible. Now she was infamous. Grayson didn't sit during the board meeting. He stood at the head of the table, jaw set, while 12 pairs of eyes watched him, like vultures, waiting for weakness. Mr. Sterling, said Whitmore, the senior board member, voice smooth as glass. We've received some troubling reports. Grayson's tone was cold. If this is about Ms. Johnson, it is. Whitmore interrupted. And about the perception of impropriety. The company can't afford scandal. There is no scandal, Grayson said. Perception is reality, son, Whitmore replied. You should know that by now. Grayson's hands clenched at his sides. She's an employee, not a headline. She was an employee, Whitmore corrected. Her contract has been terminated. It's in everyone's best interest to move on. The words landed like a verdict. For years, Grayson had lived by control, by mastering emotion, managing outcomes. But at that moment, something inside him broke through the practiced calm. He looked out the window at the rain streaking down the glass, at the city he'd spent his life trying to own, and realized how little of it was real. He had built an empire, but lost the ability to feel. Until her. And now they wanted to erase her, like she never existed. He turned back to the table, his voice low and certain. No. I won't move on. The room went still. Be careful, Grayson Whitmore warned. This company was your father's legacy. Don't throw it away over a temporary distraction. Grayson smiled without warmth. Funny. That's exactly what my father said before he lost his soul to this place. He pushed his chair back and left. Outside the boardroom, the corridor lights flickered against the storm clouds gathering beyond the windows. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over her name. But he didn't press call. Instead, he whispered into the empty hallway. Hold on, Laya. Across the city, she was sitting on the edge of her bed, drenched coat still clinging to her. The rain tapped against the window, like fingers on glass. She reached into her box of office things and found her grandmother's photo. The edges bent. The image faded. The old woman's eyes seemed to say, "Don't let them shrink you." Laya exhaled shakily. Maybe she was done being small. Maybe storms existed to teach you how to stand. The city outside roared with thunder, and in one corner of it, a man in a glass tower, a woman in a rented room. Two hearts beat to the same rhythm, each unaware that the other was fighting to keep their fragile truth alive. Tomorrow the world would begin to choose sides, and neither of them knew yet how much it would cost. The boardroom was built for intimidation, 12 seats, 12 faces carved from the same kind of money and fear. The rain outside lashed against the tall windows, blurring the skyline into streaks of silver. Grayson Sterling stood at the head of the table, hands braced on the glass, every muscle in his body wound tight. The storm outside felt tame compared to the one inside him. Whitmore, the oldest among them, leaned back in his chair, calm, condescending, the kind of man who thought morality was something for people without power. "Let's not make this personal, Grayson," he said. "We all understand how complicated things can get. But it's gone too far." Grayson said nothing. Whitmore continued, his voice a smooth knife. "A temporary assistant, and the CEO, the optics are catastrophic. Investors are already whispering, you need to end it, quietly." Another director added, "We're not asking you to fire her. That's already done. We're asking you to make a choice." Grayson's knuckles whitened. "A choice," Her Whitmore said softly, "or the company your father built." The air thinned. Even the hum of the projector died. He looked around the table. Men who had toasted him at his father's funeral, who had called him a visionary, a prodigy. But now he saw it clearly. They didn't want a visionary. They wanted a puppet with better posture. He straightened the rain-painting ghostly lines down the glass behind him. "You're asking me to trade a person for a reputation." Whitmore smiled faintly. "I'm asking you to be pragmatic. Compassion doesn't pay dividends." Grayson's voice was steady, but the edge in it could cut steel. "Then maybe you've all forgotten what we're supposed to stand for." "Careful," Whitmore warned. "You're walking a fine line." "No," Grayson said, pushing back from the table. "I'm drawing one." He turned toward the door. "You want my decision? I choose the person." The room erupted, chairs, scraping murmurs of disbelief. Whitmore's voice rising after him. "You'll regret this, Grayson." But he was already gone. That night, the city exhaled into darkness. The storm had passed, but its ghost lingered, puddles, reflecting the bruised sky streetlights, bending through mist. Grayson stood on the rooftop of the Sterling Tower, the same place he had come so many nights before to breathe, when the weight of the world threatened to crush him. But tonight, he wasn't alone. Leia was there, hair damp from the drizzle eyes, catching the glow of the skyline. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "They're already watching you." He took a step closer. "Let them." "Grayson." His voice softened, but it carried through the wind. "I'm done hiding. I'm done pretending that being human is a liability." Her breath trembled. You could lose everything. He smiled faintly. Then maybe it's time I find out what everything really means. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The city sprawled below, infinite and indifferent. The hum of traffic rose like a heartbeat, steady and distant. Finally, she said, "Why me?" He looked at her eyes, shadowed with something more than longing, something like truth. "Because when I look at you, I remember what's real. You don't want anything from me. You don't play the game. You just exist." And I forgot how to do that. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "You make it sound simple." He smiled, a little broken. "It's not. But it's the first thing that's ever felt right." She shook her head, stepping closer. "Grayson, the world you live in doesn't forgive mistakes. They'll turn this into something ugly. Then let them," he said. "Because you," he reached out, fingers brushing her cheek. "You're the only thing that doesn't feel like a mistake." He kissed her then. It wasn't the desperate cinematic kind. It was slow, reverent, the kind that stripped both of them bare, the kind that felt like a confession. And for a second, the city disappeared. There was no boardroom, no scandal, no past. Just two people against the skyline, daring the world to look. But the world did look. A faint click, almost lost beneath the sound of wind, froze him mid-breath. Laya pulled back, frowning. What was that? Grayson turned toward the edge of the rooftop. Far below, a streetlight flickered. A shadow moved. And then a flash. A camera. Someone was watching. He felt it in his gut. The precision of it, the intent. This wasn't an accident. This was a trap. Laya followed his gaze. "Grayson." He grabbed her hand. "We need to go." They took the service elevator down in silence. His reflection in the mirrored walls looked like someone else, older, harder. Hers looked afraid. When they reached the street, the night was still, but his phone was already vibrating. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. He knew exactly what it was. By dawn, the city was awake, and by 8 a.m., so was the storm. The photo had spread everywhere. A perfect shot, almost cinematic, Grayson Sterling, billionaire CEO, kissing his former assistant on a rooftop under the rain. Power and passion, the Sterling scandal. Who is Laya Johnson? Her face was everywhere, on news tickers, on gossip blogs, on social feeds. The woman who had once been invisible was now the most visible person in New York. Laya sat in her apartment, the blinds drawn, her phone buzzing nonstop. Messages from strangers, journalists, old acquaintances pretending to care. The captions hurt more than the headlines. Gold digger. Corporate affair. He'll drop her by next week. She turned off her phone and sat in silence, her chest tight. It wasn't just humiliation. It was exposure, the unbearable truth of being seen by people who didn't care who you were, only what you looked like. And yet, even through the fear, one memory kept her steady. The rooftop, the way he'd said her name like it was something holy. In his penthouse office, Grayson faced his own reckoning. The board's emergency meeting was already underway. The company's PR team was in crisis mode, drafting statements he refused to approve. Say it was taken out of context, one advisor insisted. Claim manipulation, said another. Distance yourself, Whitmore advised coldly. If you don't, you'll take the company down with you. Grayson stood at the window, watching the headlines scroll across the digital billboards outside. He saw her face there, the woman who had nothing to defend herself with but her own dignity, and something in him hardened. He turned. No statements, no denials. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. You're making a mistake. Grayson smiled faintly. Maybe, but it's mine to make. He left the room before anyone could stop him. Outside, the air smelled like rain again. the kind that came before another storm. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring: lawsuits, headlines, exile. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he wasn't going to let them erase her. Not this time. That night, as the city lights blurred through another curtain of drizzle, Leia stood by her window, staring at the same tower that once held her dreams. Somewhere inside, he was fighting battles she couldn't see. Somewhere inside, someone was waiting for him to break. She whispered to herself, not knowing he was doing the same across the city. Don't stop. And as the rain fell heavier, one question echoed through the night: if love was powerful enough to defy the rules, was it strong enough to survive the price? By morning, the city had turned her name into currency. Billionaire CEO caught kissing his black assistant. The headline flashed across every screen: brutal, efficient, unstoppable. Within hours, Leia Johnson was no longer a person. She was a story. Her inbox flooded with interview requests, offers from tabloids promising money for her side of the truth. Strangers dissected her skin tone, her dress, her smile, her audacity to exist beside him. The same streets that once ignored her now whispered her name like a curse. By the third day, her landlord called. "I'm sorry, Ms. Johnson," he said, his voice uneasy. "It's just with all the attention, the board doesn't want trouble. You'll have to leave by the end of the week." She hung up without replying. Her world had shrunk to the size of a suitcase and the sound of her own breath. Meanwhile, at the top of the Sterling Tower, the storm had found its second wind. Grayson's office, usually a fortress of order, was chaos. Printed headlines covering the mahogany desk monitors flickering with news feeds. Every channel said his name, with a different flavor of scandal. The board demanded statements. The PR team drafted apologies, and his phone buzzed with investors, asking the same question, in 100 polite ways: is she worth it? He had spent his entire life protecting the company's image. Now that image had teeth, and it was feeding on him. Mr. Sterling said, the lead publicist, standing stiffly by the window, "We've crafted a statement that distances the company from. Her Grayson interrupted. The woman hesitated. "From the situation." He laughed, sharp, humorless. "You mean the woman I care about?" "Sir, this isn't about feelings," she said carefully. "This is about perception." Grayson turned eyes cold, and perception is what destroyed her. Silence fell. Everyone in the room froze. He picked up the nearest folder, the one labeled Crisis Management, and hurled it across the table. Papers scattered like startled birds. "She's not a liability," he said, voice rising. "She's the reason I remember I'm human." Then he left, ignoring the whispers that followed him out. Leia wandered the city for hours that day. She didn't go home. She didn't have one anymore. When the rain started, she ducked into a narrow alley where a small weathered sign hung above a glass door: Whitmore and Sons. Rare books. The irony didn't hit her until later. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and time. Shelves leaned against each other like tired friends. At the counter sat an older woman with silver hair and soft eyes that had seen too many versions of the world. "Lost, the woman?" asked, her voice gentle. Leia shook her head. "Just hiding." The woman smiled knowingly. The best reason to be in a bookstore. Leia wandered through the aisles, tracing her fingers along spines that carried other people's stories, stories where women survived or didn't, but were at least remembered for something more than who they loved. She found a corner by the window, sat on the floor, and pulled out her phone. She shouldn't have. The comments were poison. "She's ruining his career. He'll replace her by Monday. A gold digger in cheap heels." Her hand trembled. She turned the phone off. The old woman appeared beside her, crouching down like a grandmother might. You look like someone who's listening to too much noise. Leia swallowed hard. It's hard to ignore when the whole world's shouting. The woman nodded slowly. Then maybe you're not supposed to shout back. Leia frowned. What do you mean? The woman smiled, her eyes, soft but certain. Silence isn't weakness, dear. Sometimes it's rebellion. Don't let the noise outside make you forget the person inside. Something in Leia cracked quietly, invisibly, the way glass does before it shatters. For days, she'd been surviving on fear and adrenaline. But now, in that old bookstore that smelled of dust and rain, she felt something else, stillness. Maybe she didn't have to prove anything. Maybe being still was its own kind of defiance. She thanked the woman, bought a used copy of The Great Gatsby for $3, and stepped back into the gray afternoon. The city still roared around her, but its noise didn't reach as deep. Across the river, Grayson sat alone in his penthouse. Every light turned off except the one by his desk. The skyline glimmered beyond the glass like an accusation. He hadn't spoken to her in days. Every attempt ended with him staring at her name on his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen, afraid that calling would only make things worse. He'd thought power could protect people. But now he understood power only protected itself. He scrolled through the endless coverage, their kiss dissected, slowed, zoomed in. Analysts debating his future like it was a sport. One headline stopped him cold. Can a man who breaks the rules still lead an empire? He closed the laptop. The rain outside blurred the city until it looked like watercolor, beautiful, but fading. Leia spent that night in a rented room above a bakery in Harlem. The walls were thin, the floorboards uneven, but for the first time in weeks, she slept. In her dream, she was back on the rooftop. Only this time, there was no camera, no city, no fear, just music. When she woke, sunlight spilled through the blinds. It felt wrong, almost cruel, to see the world so gentle when everything inside her was still cracked. She opened the book she'd bought and found a note tucked between the pages. A quote handwritten in looping script. "We are all broken. That's how the light gets in." Hemingway. She smiled, small but real. Maybe the woman at the bookstore had slipped it there. Maybe it didn't matter. All she knew was that she wasn't going to run anymore. Later that day, Grayson walked into his office and found Whitmore waiting for him. "Do you feel proud of yourself?" Whitmore asked coolly. "You've made the front page of every paper from here to London." Grayson's voice was calm, almost quiet. "I didn't ask for their approval." "No," Whitmore said. "But you're about to lose everything built on it." Grayson stepped closer, his gaze steady. "Then maybe it wasn't worth building." Whitmore smirked. "You think this is about love? It's about control. You've lost yours. She'll drag you down, and when she does, no one will remember her name, only that you were foolish enough to believe she mattered." Grayson didn't flinch. "You're wrong," he said, and walked out. That night, the storm returned, a quiet one this time, all mist and memory. Leia stood at the window of the small bakery room, watching the city lights blur into gold and gray. Somewhere out there he was still fighting, maybe for her, maybe for himself. Either way, the world had turned its back, but in the stillness she found something the noise could never touch, her own rhythm. The next morning she pulled her hair into a bun, put on her coat, and stepped out into the street. She didn't know where she was going yet, but she knew she was done hiding. The world had taken everything, but it hadn't taken her will to stand back up. And somewhere in an office high above the skyline, a man who once worshipped control was learning the same lesson. That sometimes the only way to find the light again is to let yourself break in the dark first. The rain had stopped, but the city still wore its gray bruises. Days had passed since the headlines began to fade, Yet Laya's name still lingered online, like smoke that refused to clear. She'd stopped checking her phone, stopped reading the news. Silence had become her only safe place, until it rang, a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A man's voice, low and urgent, came through. "Ms. Johnson, you don't know me, but I used to work at Sterling Global Compliance Division." Leia froze. "Why are you calling me? Because you deserve to know the truth." His tone was heavy, almost apologetic. "The rooftop photo. The scandal, it wasn't random. It was planned. They used the building's security feed to set you both up." Her chest tightened. "Who?" A pause. Then quietly, "Whitmore." The name landed like ice. The man continued. "He's been trying to push Grayson out for months. The photo was part of a larger smear campaign. You were collateral." Laya felt the air leave her lungs. For a long moment she couldn't speak. "I have files," the man said. "Timestamps, internal logs, directives. Enough to prove it. I can send them. Do what you need to with them, just be careful. They won't go down quietly." Then the line went dead. She stood there, the phone pressed to her ear, the city humming faintly outside. When the files came through, moments later, she opened them, a string of screenshots, video captures, access records. It was all there. Proof that the story that had destroyed her was never about love, but about power. And suddenly the silence she'd built around herself began to fracture. Grayson hadn't seen her in weeks. He'd buried himself in meetings, lawyers' endless attempts to salvage the company he no longer believed in. He looked like a ghost of himself, sleepless, unshaven, existing on caffeine and anger. When the knock came on his apartment door, he almost didn't answer. But when he did, and saw her standing there, damp hair, dark eyes, laptop clutched in her hands, something in him finally breathed again. "Leia," he whispered like a prayer. He'd forgotten he knew. She stepped inside, her voice steady. "I have something to show you." Within minutes, his dining table was covered in evidence-printed pages, screenshots, access records, tracing the leak back to Whitmore's personal account. Grayson stared at them, disbelieving. This is impossible. These files, they're real," she said quietly. "He used the company's surveillance system to track you, to record us. That night on the rooftop, he made sure someone was there." Grayson's hands trembled as he turned the papers. "He used my father's company to spy on me." "Not just you," she said. "On anyone he couldn't control." Silence filled the room, thick, electric. Outside, the city lights flickered like distant witnesses. Finally, Grayson spoke. "If we release this, it will destroy him." Leia met his eyes. "Good." He looked at her for a long time, the fire in her gaze, the strength she'd reclaimed. "You're not afraid anymore," he said softly. "I was," she admitted, "but fear kept me quiet, and quiet almost killed me." They needed help, someone who could tell the story truthfully. That's when Grayson remembered a name he hadn't said in years. Carolyn. She was an investigative journalist, once a friend, until Sterling Global had blacklisted her for exposing corruption in one of their subsidiaries. The company had painted her as a liar. Grayson had believed them then. Now he knew better. He called her that night. "Grayson Sterling," she said when she answered. "I thought you only called people to fire them. I need your help," he said simply. There was a pause. "You have 2 minutes to convince me you're not wasting my time. I have evidence of a corporate cover-up, and I owe you an apology." That earned a soft laugh. "Well," she said, "that's new." He sent her the files. The silence that followed was long and heavy. Finally, Kara said, "This could blow up half your boardroom. You're sure about this?" "I'm sure." Grayson said. But it's not just about me anymore. It's about her. Kara hesitated. Then meet me tomorrow. Both of you. The cafe was small, tucked between two forgotten buildings downtown, the kind of place where stories were born in whispers. Kara was already there when they arrived, her sharp eyes scanning the documents before she even greeted them. When she looked up, her expression had softened, just slightly. You weren't exaggerating, she said. This is massive. They used company systems to frame her, Grayson said. And they're still hiding it. Kara nodded. Then let's give the world something it can't ignore. Leia swallowed hard. You'll tell everything. Kara's gaze met hers, direct, unflinching. Only if you want it told. Leia hesitated. If I do this, there's no going back. Everyone will know. My name, my face. Kara's voice was gentle. They already do. But this time, they'll know why. Leia looked at Grayson. His hand found hers under the table, not as possession, but as promise. Tell it all, she said finally. No edits, no filters. The truth. The article dropped 3 days later. Love or Power Play. The story behind the Sterling scandal. But it wasn't a scandal anymore. Kara's piece didn't sell gossip. It exposed the system, the corruption, the surveillance, the manipulation. It told the story of a woman who had been turned into a weapon and the man who refused to let her be erased. Screens lit up across the country. Talk shows debated. Journalists dissected. And for once, the noise wasn't about the color of her skin or the scandal of their kiss. It was about the machine that had tried to bury them both. Leia sat in the bookstore, where it had all started, the same old woman smiling behind the counter. They're talking about you again, the woman said softly. But it sounds different this time. Leia smiled faintly. Maybe they're finally listening. At Sterling Global, chaos erupted. Whitmore's name trended within hours. Shareholders demanded explanations. Legal teams scrambled. The board issued a public statement denying involvement, but the evidence was undeniable. By evening, Whitmore had disappeared from the city, his office emptied, his phone disconnected. Grayson stood at the window of his old office watching the headlines scroll across the building opposite. Sterling scandal turns corporate reckoning. He didn't smile. He didn't feel triumphant. He just felt clean. Beside him, Leia joined him at the window. You did it, she said. No, he murmured. We did. They stood in silence, the city glittering below. For the first time, they weren't hiding or defending or running. They were simply there, side by side. Two people who had been broken by power, now holding on to something truer than either had known. I used to think love was the weakest thing a man like me could feel, Grayson said quietly. But maybe it's the only thing that can't be bought. Leia looked at him. The man who had once been all marble and distance, and saw someone finally human. Outside, sirens wailed somewhere far off the city, swallowing its own noise. And in the middle of it, their silence felt stronger than any sound. The story spread faster than they could imagine. Across newsrooms, classrooms, even government hearings, people spoke not just of scandal, but of ethics, of surveillance, of how easily systems turned people into pawns. For once, the world saw not a billionaire and his assistant, but two people who refused to stay silent. Still, beneath the relief, there was unease. Kara called them a week later. Her voice was low, serious. I think there's more. What do you mean? Grayson asked. The files I published, they weren't all. Someone buried deeper archives. Someone who didn't want you to see the rest. What kind of files? Leia asked. Kara hesitated. On Whitmore. And maybe on you. Grayson's face darkened. Send them. Kara sighed. Already did. But be careful. The story's not over, Grayson. It's just waking up. That night, as the city drifted into uneasy quiet, Leia sat beside Grayson on the rooftop, where everything had begun. The skyline flickered like embers beneath them. He looked at her. "You think we'll ever be normal again?" She smiled faintly. Normal's overrated. The wind lifted her hair, carrying the faint echo of Ella Fitzgerald from a bar below. "Fly me to the moon." For the first time, the song didn't hurt. It sounded like freedom. But somewhere far below, a single email notification blinked to life on Grayson's phone from an unknown sender. Subject: "You think you've won. You haven't even started." Leia saw the light of the screen reflected in his eyes. "What is it?" she asked. Grayson's jaw tightened, a reminder he said quietly, that truth has enemies too. And as the city lights burned against the night, they both understood this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the next fight. The boardroom looked different that morning, not in the furniture, not in the view, but in the air itself. Tense, charged, waiting. Outside, a gray dawn crawled over the skyline light, breaking through clouds like truth forcing its way past denial. Inside, 12 people sat in their usual seats, though none looked as certain as before. When the elevator doors opened, the sound echoed like a verdict. Grayson Sterling walked in. No security, no entourage, just a small flash drive in his hand. The whispers started immediately. Cameras clicked from the corners where journalists had gathered by invitation. He placed the USB on the glass table. "This," he said calmly, "is the truth you've all tried to bury." Whitmore, sitting at the head of the table, gave a faint smirk. "Grayson, this is unnecessary theater. We all know the media loves your little redemption story." Grayson cut him off. "Play it." No one moved. Then one of the junior board members, a woman with tired eyes, reached for the laptop and plugged in the drive. The speakers hissed to life. For a moment there was only static. Then a familiar voice, Whitmore's, filled the room. "Don't worry. I've already set the trap. He'll fall and she'll fall with him." The sound was crisp, inevitable. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. Every person in the room shifted, trying to look at anyone but him. Whitmore's composure cracked a flicker of panic behind his practiced grin. "That could be anyone's voice," he said. "Deepfakes. Manufactured audio." The door opened before he could finish. Kara Lynn stepped inside, followed by a man in a gray suit, a digital forensics specialist whose credentials carried the kind of authority no PR statement could erase. "This recording," Kara announced, her voice steady, "has been verified by 2 independent labs. The metadata is intact, and the timestamps align with your internal meeting logs, Mr. Whitmore." She placed a folder on the table signed "Certificates of Authenticity." The room inhaled sharply. Whitmore's hands clenched. "You can't just barge in here." "I can," Kara interrupted, "and I did. The public has a right to the truth, and now the company does too." Grayson turned to the room. "You built this empire on transparency. Prove it means something." No one spoke. Then the youngest board member, a woman barely 30, who had joined Sterling Global only months ago, whispered, "This isn't just about one scandal, is it?" Grayson looked at her. "No, it's about a system that taught you silence is safer than honesty." Her eyes lowered, ashamed. Another director stood up. "I'm resigning," he said quietly. "I won't defend this." One by one, others followed, some out of guilt, others out of fear. But it didn't matter. The old guard was collapsing under the weight of their own lies. When Whitmore finally spoke again, his voice was hoarse. "You think this makes you some kind of hero? You've destroyed your family's company, your legacy." Grayson smiled faintly. "Maybe legacy isn't what you leave behind, but what you refuse to carry forward. Security entered the room. Whitmore didn't resist when they escorted him out, though his eyes burned with a promise that this wasn't the end. The door closed, and for the first time in years, the boardroom was quiet in a way that didn't feel like control, but release. Hours later, the story broke across every major network. Sterling global scandal exposed. CEO clears. Name corruption revealed. The headline was everywhere, but this time it wasn't about the kiss or the scandal or the race of the woman at the center. It was about the truth. Former employees began to speak out. Whistleblowers sent statements. Within days, an internal investigation had opened into years of unethical surveillance and manipulation under Whitmore's direction. Grayson refused interviews. He didn't want to be the headline anymore. He wanted to build something cleaner from the ruins. When Leia heard the news, she didn't cry. She just sat still in her small apartment, sunlight pooling across the floor, like something fragile finally returning. The phone buzzed all morning with messages from Kara, from strangers, from people who once turned away. But none of it mattered as much as the quiet that settled inside her chest, the kind that only comes after surviving a storm you thought would never end. Then in the afternoon, her phone buzzed again. A short message from an unknown number. He's waiting downstairs. The Sterling Tower loomed over her like a place she once belonged to in another life. She hadn't stepped inside since the day she'd walked out carrying a box of her things. Now the guards didn't stop her. They didn't even meet her eyes, not out of pity, but respect. She walked through the lobby, past the marble floors, and the echoes of gossip that no longer followed her. Every step felt like reclaiming something: dignity, presence, power. And there he was, standing at the base of the grand staircase, dressed in a simple suit, tie loosened, exhaustion etched around his eyes, but he was smiling. Grayson Sterling, the man who once hid behind glass walls, now standing in the open waiting. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. He started walking toward her, the crowd around them parting instinctively. When he stopped in front of her, there were no grand gestures, no cameras, no performance. Just two people who had been dragged through hell and somehow found each other still standing. She smiled softly. "You did it." He shook his head. "We did." For a moment, the chaos of the world melted away. She stepped closer, her voice low. "So what happens now?" Looked up at the tower that had once defined his life, its mirrored windows glinting in the sunlight. "We start over," he said. "But this time, we build something that breathes." And as they stood there, surrounded by the noise of a city, learning their names for the right reasons, at last, it wasn't victory. They felt it was peace. The kind that comes only when justice stops being an idea and becomes a pulse you can feel under your skin. That evening, the board released its official statement. Effective immediately. Harold Whitmore has been removed from his position. Interim leadership will focus on transparency and ethical restoration under the guidance of former CEO Grayson Sterling. But Grayson didn't return to his office that night. He walked instead through streets still wet from the morning rain until he found himself in front of the old bookstore. Through the window, he saw Leia inside helping the silver-haired owner stack books on a high shelf. She was laughing, a sound so natural, so free, he almost didn't want to interrupt. When she noticed him, her laughter softened into a smile. She set the book down, walked to the door, and stepped out into the evening light. "You found me again," she said. "I never stopped looking." She tilted her head. "And now that you've got your truth," he smiled faintly, "now I want something real." She reached for his hand. fingers brushing his. Then maybe we both found it. That night, as they walked along the quiet street, a news truck passed by, blaring the day's victory into the dark. But neither of them turned to look. The city was changing louder, faster, hungrier than ever, but for the first time, it didn't scare them. They had broken the glass wall not just between them and the world, but between who they were and who they could be. Above them, skyscrapers shimmered with light reflections of a city learning slowly to see beyond power. And somewhere in that light, the ghosts of fear began to fade. Still, as they turned the corner, Grayson's phone vibrated in his pocket. A single message flashed across the screen. Yale recovered Whitmore. Phase 2. He stopped walking. Leia looked at him. What is it? He exhaled slowly. Something tells me our fight isn't over yet. The streetlight flickered above them, brief bright like a warning. And as the night deepened around them, the truth that had once set them free whispered a new promise. Freedom always comes with a cost. The world had stopped calling them a scandal months ago. Now people called them something else: visionaries. The Sterling Johnson Foundation launched in a converted art gallery on the Lower East Side, its walls painted with color and hope. It wasn't about wealth or rebranding. It was about rebuilding, not just reputations, but lives. The foundation's mission was simple: to give women of color the resources, mentorship, and capital that the system had always denied them. To Grayson, it was the first thing he'd ever built that didn't depend on power. To Leia, it was a dream she never thought she'd live to see. The opening night gala glowed with soft gold light, city music spilling in through open windows. Guests in tailored suits and flowing dresses mingled between sculptures made of recycled glass. Broken things turned beautiful again. It felt poetic. At the center of it all, Leia stood barefoot on the polished wooden floor. Her dark green dress, the same one she'd worn the night of their first dinner, fluttered around her knees. A small jazz band played in the corner, the opening notes of "Fly Me to the Moon" curling through the air like smoke. She didn't plan to dance. She hadn't danced since the night everything began. But as the melody rose, something inside her, something quiet and luminous, whispered, "Now." Leia slipped off her heels. The room hushed without meaning to, drawn to her the way people are drawn to light. She closed her eyes and let her body move, not rehearsed, not perfect, but alive. Her arms lifted her steps soft against the wood. Every twirl, every breath carried years of silence, shame, and survival melting away. For the first time, she wasn't dancing to hide or to escape. She was dancing to exist. Across the room, Grayson watched her, his hands in his pockets, his heart no longer a fortress. The first time he'd seen her dance, he'd been a man defined by control, standing behind glass. Tonight he was just a man in love, standing in the open. She turned once, her eyes finding his in the crowd, and the world fell quiet. He smiled. So did she. And when the song ended, the applause that erupted wasn't polite. It was grateful. Because everyone in that room had seen something pure, something the world rarely allows a woman who had refused to disappear. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the city hummed outside, they found themselves alone on the rooftop. The same one where it had all begun. The moon hung low over the skyline, full and forgiving. Grayson leaned against the railing, sleeves rolled up, tie gone. "You know," he said softly, "I once thought love was a weakness, a distraction that made men like me lose focus." Leia smiled, stepping closer. And now, he looked at her, really looked. "Now I think it's the only thing that's ever made me strong." She tilted her head, teasing gently. "Careful, Mr. Sterling. That almost sounds like growth." He laughed quietly. Don't ruin my redemption arc, Ms. Johnson. She laughed too, but there was softness in her voice when she said, You didn't need redemption. You just needed to feel again. He reached for her hand. And you needed to stop apologizing for taking up space. Their fingers intertwined, not like rescue, but like recognition. The city glimmered below the pulse of millions, living, rushing, loving. For once, it didn't feel so far away. Do you ever think about how it started? She asked after a while. All the time, he admitted. That night in the office, I came back for a forgotten file. Turns out it was my life I'd forgotten. She smiled faintly. And you found it. Watching a girl dance alone. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. No, I found it the moment she stopped hiding. They stood there in silence, the kind that said everything words couldn't. Above them, the moonlight spilled across the rooftop like mercy. Weeks passed, and the foundation grew faster than either of them expected. Applications poured in from women across the country. Small-town dreamers. Mothers, former assistants who'd once been told they'd never belong in boardrooms. Every story Leah read reminded her why she had survived. One afternoon during a mentorship event, a young woman approached her, nervous eyes shining. Ms. Johnson, she said, I just wanted to say, your story got me through my divorce. I thought I'd lost everything, but you made me believe I could start over. Leah's throat tightened. You didn't lose yourself, she said gently. You just changed shape. When the woman left, Grayson found Leah standing by the window, wiping a tear, discreetly. He didn't say anything. He just took her hand, quiet understanding passing between them. They both knew now impact wasn't about making noise. It was about giving others permission to breathe. That night at the closing ceremony of the Foundation's first fundraising season, Leah took the stage. Spotlights dimmed, cameras flashed, but her voice when she spoke was calm. I used to think survival meant silence, she began. That the best way to stay safe was to stay small. But sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is stop believing you matter. She looked toward Grayson standing near the back, his expression unreadable, but proud. I stand here today, she continued, because one act of cruelty tried to erase me and love refused to let it. The audience rose in applause, not for tragedy, but for triumph. Grayson's eyes stung. He thought of his father, the man who'd built empires, but died empty. He thought of Whitmore, who had mistaken power for permanence. And then he thought of her, the woman who'd turned pain into purpose. When she stepped down from the stage, he met her halfway. You were brilliant, he said. I was honest, she replied. Same thing he said, smiling. After the event, they drove to the edge of the city. No cameras, no speeches, just them. The night sky was a blanket of stars, the kind of quiet that feels earned. They sat on the hood of his car, sharing the last piece of lemon cake from the event, both laughing at how unglamorous it felt. Grayson looked up at the moon, the same one that had followed them through scandal, heartbreak, and rebirth. Funny, he said. I used to think the moon was just decoration. Leah leaned against him. And now? He smiled. Now I think it's proof that light can survive anywhere, even after the world turns its back. She laughed softly. That's poetic for a man who used to communicate in stock reports. He kissed her temple. You made me fluent in human. She smiled into the dark. Then promise me one thing, that we'll keep dancing, even when no one's watching. He nodded, especially then. The wind carried the faint hum of the city far below, a heartbeat that was no longer something to escape, but something to belong to. And as the night stretched open around them, Leah whispered almost to herself, maybe this is what flying feels like, not leaving the ground, but finally being unafraid to look up. The moon hung low and bright over New York, its light spilling across the water like a benediction. Down below on the rooftop, where it had all begun, a small jazz trio played softly, the same melody, the same rhythm. Fly me to the moon, let me play among the stars. And in that moment, two souls once broken, once buried beneath noise and fear, simply existed in the same breath, in the same truth. Not as a billionaire and his assistant, not as scandal or redemption, but as two people who had finally learned how to see each other. When the world looks at you through the lens of prejudice, let kindness and courage rewrite the story. Love doesn't erase differences. It gives us the strength to face them and to rise anyway.